300 wasn't just a war movie, it was a blood-soaked painting come to life. A king, a wall of shields, and a war fought in slow motion. But behind the abs and battle cries, it was chaos. The studio didn't believe in it. The cast nearly broke from the training. And one scene, it was based on a real war crime. These are 20 weird facts about 300. And buried beneath the legend, a secret Spartan trial where boys became killers. In silence. Stand tall. The gods are watching. Number 1. Nobody wanted it. Not at first. A hyper-stylized war epic based on a comic book set in ancient Greece with no big stars? Studios passed. Executives smiled politely. It was too risky, too weird, too loud. But Zack Snyder wasn't walking away. He took scenes from Frank Miller's graphic novel, recruited a few stuntmen, and shot his own proof of concept, a stylized, blood-soaked demo reel that looked nothing like what Hollywood was used to. He lit it like myth, cut it like music. Every frame screamed, "This isn't history, it's legend." And that demo worked. Warner Brothers didn't just say yes, they handed him the kingdom. Because in a business built on safe bets, 300 got greenlit by a guy who bet on himself and rewrote the rules with a sword in each hand. Number 2. Frank Miller didn't stumble into Sparta. He grew up haunted by it. As a kid, he saw the 1962 film, The 300 Spartan, and something clicked. Not just the battles, the sacrifice, the final stand. He carried it with him for decades. And when he finally reimagined the legend, he didn't want realism. He wanted myth. His version of the story was brutal, exaggerated, and soaked in shadows. A fantasy, yes, but one rooted in childhood awe and sharpened by adult fury. It wasn't about historical detail. It was about honor, madness, and the line between glory and death. Number 3. They weren't sure about him. Too intense, too unknown, too Scottish. But Gerard Butler walked into that room with something to prove. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for action. He stood up, roared the line, and kicked a chair across the casting room floor.
"This is Sparta!"
The room froze. No one laughed. Because it wasn't a performance, it was a takeover. That wasn't just how he got the role. It was how he became a legend. Number 4. There were no stunt doubles, no digital muscles, just pain. To look like warriors forged in bronze, the cast of 300 went through a training regime so brutal it earned a name of its own, the 300 workout. It wasn't just about lifting weights, it was punishment, flipping tires, sprinting uphill, endless push-ups, pull-ups, kettlebells, exhaustion, then doing it again and again. Gerard Butler said some actors cried, others threw up, and by the end, every man on that set had earned the armor on his back. The results were undeniable, but the cost? Sore joints, torn muscles, days they couldn't walk straight. They didn't train like actors. They trained like Spartans. And when the cameras rolled, you could see the pain still in their eyes. That wasn't a costume. That was war. Number 5. Leonitis never flinched. Neither did the actor playing him. Gerard Butler didn't wear a padded suit. He wore pain. The training was brutal. The choreography was relentless. And Butler pushed harder than anyone. He tore muscles mid-scene, took hits that left bruises deep enough to bleed. There were days he could barely lift the shield, but he didn't stop. He kept moving, kept shouting, kept fighting. Because to him, playing a Spartan meant earning it. The scars, the strain, the suffering. When he roared, "This is Sparta," he wasn't just acting. He was surviving. Every frame hurt, and every second of it made the legend feel real. Number 6. The moves weren't random. They were rooted in history. Before the slow-motion carnage, before the stylized gore, the fight team studied real Greek warfare. Shield strikes, spear thrusts, phalanx tactics. Every formation had a purpose. Every motion came from battle manuals written thousands of years ago. But this wasn't a museum piece. It was 300. So they took those ancient drills and amped them, added cinematic violence, built sequences like graphic novel panels come to life. They called it historical myth, authentic in spirit, exaggerated in spectacle. And when the Spartans moved on screen, they weren't just soldiers. They were a storm, disciplined, unstoppable, a wall of steel with rhythm and rage. Number 7. The wall of shields, the stomping advance, the crushing unity. The phalanx wasn't a movie invention. It was real and terrifying. In ancient Sparta, soldiers fought as one body. No gaps, no ego. Each man's shield protected the warrior beside him. In 300, Snyder turned it into a moving wall of death. Tight, brutal, unstoppable. It wasn't just strategy. It was identity. The message was simple: break formation, and you die. Number 8. There was no Greece, no hills, no sea, no sun. Just a giant warehouse in Montreal, filled with blue screens and vision. 90% of 300 was shot on a soundstage. No castles, no cliffs. Just actors swinging swords in a void, trusting that it would all come together. And somehow, it did. Zack Snyder and his team built an entire world from scratch. They painted storms. They forged firelight and stone with code and color grading. They made pixels feel like myth. It wasn't about realism. It was about intensity. Every backdrop, every shadow, every gust of dust, all dialed for drama. 300 didn't recreate the past. It invented its own battlefield and made you believe every inch of it. Number 9. The blood didn't splash, it danced. Zack Snyder didn't want gore that looked like news footage. He wanted something surreal, stylized, beautiful even. Every spray, every slash was crafted digitally, with intention. Too red, too clean, too dramatic. It wasn't just about violence. It was about rhythm. Each drop moved with the music. Each wound hit like a panel in Frank Miller's graphic novel. This wasn't war. It was a painting, in motion. Number 10. He towered over men, shimmered in gold, spoke in whispers that felt like thunder. But the God King of Persia didn't just walk onto set. He was sculpted. Actor Rodrigo Santoro spent over 5 hours a day in the makeup chair, having piercings applied, chains glued to his body, and his skin painted to gleam like metal. His voice was dropped lower in post. His eyes were enhanced digitally. But the rest? That towering presence? That was pure transformation. He didn't play a god. He became one. Number 11. The legend starts early. Too early. In ancient Sparta, children weren't raised. They were forged. At age 7, boys were taken from their families and placed in the agoge, a brutal state-run training program. There was no comfort, no warmth, only pain, discipline, and survival. They were beaten, starved, forced to fight, and punished for weakness. And by the time they returned, they weren't boys anymore. 300 barely scratches the surface, but that cold training, it's what turned farmers into warriors, and sons into Spartans. Number 12. It wasn't meant to be tender, not in a story built on blood and shields. But when Leonitis turned to Gorgo for the last time, the moment cracked through the armor. Her whisper,
"Come back with your shield. Or on it."
His look, their silence. It hit harder than any war cry. Some of that farewell was in the script, but much of it, the way they held the silence, the weight in their eyes, came from instinct. From two actors who knew what these characters were about to lose. Snyder didn't yell cut. He let it live. Because in a film filled with battle and sacrifice, it was that one quiet goodbye. That left the deepest scar. Number 13. They weren't fighting for survival. They were fighting for glory. To the Spartans, war wasn't a last resort. It was a way of life, bound by honor, duty, and one brutal rule: never retreat, never surrender. From birth, Spartan boys were taught to fight or die trying. At age 7, they were pulled from their families and trained in the agoge, a system designed to beat the fear out of them. By the time they held a spear, the choice was clear: come home carrying your shield, or be carried home on it. 300 didn't invent that intensity. It barely captured it. Because when Leonitis said, "Spartans, prepare for glory," he wasn't asking for their loyalty. He was reminding them death was already part of the deal. Number 14. It didn't look like other war films. It didn't even look like Earth. That's because 300 didn't just use filters. It built a new way to color the entire movie. The technique was called the crush, and it let Snyder push contrast and tone to extremes. Bronze skin, red blood, black skies, all sculpted frame by frame. It took months, frame by frame. Every soldier's silhouette shaped by shadow and myth. It wasn't realism. It was style as substance, and it changed how action films looked for the next decade. Number 15. They called it a cartoon, a fantasy, an insult to real history. When 300 hit theaters, some historians didn't just criticize it, they attacked it. The armor was wrong, the tactics were stylized, and Xerxes, he never wore chains of gold or stood 10 feet tall. But while scholars rolled their eyes, millions leaned in. Searches for Thermopylae exploded. Book sales on Sparta surged. College courses filled with students who had never touched Herodotus until now. The film may have played loose with facts, but it lit a fire. It didn't teach history. It made people want to know it. Because for all its slow-motion chaos and comic book blood, 300 reminded the world of one truth. Legends may not be accurate, but they make us remember. Number 16. They didn't wear capes to look cool. They wore them because they kept out the cold. In real life, Spartan gear wasn't designed for style. It was engineered for survival. Their iconic bronze helmets, heavy, narrow, nearly blind in combat, but they protected everything. Their shields, massive and round, not for parrying swords, but for pushing forward. In formation, they became a wall, unbreakable, unforgiving. The spear was their primary weapon, not the sword. Light, lethal, and thrown with terrifying accuracy. Hollywood made it dramatic, but Sparta made it deadly. There were no decorations, no gold trim, no ornament, only tools. Because in Sparta, glory didn't come from how you looked. It came from how many enemies fell at your feet. Number 17. Nobody saw it coming. A hyper-violent R-rated war film based on a comic book with no household names and no real sets. It wasn't supposed to be a hit, but 300 didn't follow rules. It broke them. Word of mouth exploded. Crowds showed up in armor. Midnight screenings turned into packed weekends. And before Hollywood could catch its breath, the film crossed $450 million worldwide, all on a $65 million budget. It crushed expectations, outgrossed Oscar winners, and silenced every exec who said, "Too weird, too risky." It proved you didn't need stars, didn't need realism, you just needed a vision and the will to charge straight through the gates. 300 wasn't built to play safe, it was built to conquer. Number 18. Before 300, he wasn't a household name. He was the guy who remade Dawn of the Dead, a stylish director with something to prove. Then 300 exploded. The look, the violence, the unapologetic boldness of it all. It wasn't just a film, it was a flex. Critics were split, audiences weren't. And suddenly, every studio wanted to know, who's Zack Snyder? Overnight, he was handed the keys to Hollywood's biggest myths: Watchmen, Man of Steel, the birth of the DCEU. He didn't follow the rules, he made his own. Because 300 didn't just change his career, it built his legend. One frame at a time, and all in slow motion. Number 19. It looks like a horror fantasy, but it came from something real. In 300, there's a moment that stops the Spartan march cold. A grotesque tree of the dead, made of butchered villagers, fused into a warning. It wasn't in the original comic. It was born during rewrites, when Warner Brothers asked for a scene that showed the Persian invasion's brutality. Co-writer Kurt Johnstad remembered something, a real story, from the war in Yugoslavia. He'd heard about villages where corpses were arranged as messages, grotesque, psychological warfare meant to break spirits before a battle even began. He pitched it to Snyder, and Snyder said yes. The image was so powerful, so disturbing, it didn't need a word of dialogue. Because sometimes the most terrifying scenes in a fantasy film aren't fantasy at all. Number 20. It started as a way to look like warriors, but it turned into something more. The cast of 300 trained like Spartans. No stunt doubles, no shortcuts, just sweat, sandbags, and pain. They called it the 300 workout, and when the film dropped, so did Jaws. Viewers didn't just ask how they did it, they tried to do it themselves. Gyms rebranded, trainers launched full programs, CrossFit boxes built workouts inspired by Spartan drills, books, DVDs, boot camps, all chasing that same carved, battle-ready look. It wasn't about the abs, it was about the attitude, the discipline. The myth made muscle, because 300 didn't just change action movies. It redefined what strength looked like, and what it could feel like. Bonus fact. It sounds like something from a horror film, but the Cryptia was real, and darker than anything 300 dared to show. In the movie, we see the agoge, brutal training, boys fighting wolves, learning pain, but the final test? That part was left out. Because in real life, it didn't end in a cave. It ended in blood. Spartan boys, once hardened by training, were chosen for one last rite of passage. They were sent into the countryside, alone, at night, with orders to kill. Their targets? Helots, the enslaved class. Anyone seen as a threat to Spartan control. No armor, no backup, just a dagger, the dark, and a mission. It wasn't just training, it was state-sponsored terror, disguised as tradition. And it turned teenagers into ghosts before they ever became soldiers. 300 gave us the battle, but this was the nightmare behind it. 300 wasn't just swords and sand, it was a myth retold, sharpened into legend. It showed us how far one group would go to defend their name, even if it meant turning every goodbye into a war cry. And 2 decades later, it still echoes. Through fitness, through fandom, through every slow-motion charge into the impossible. If this story hit you like a shield wall, drop a comment below. Tell us which battle we should bring to life next. Because as long as there are stories worth shouting, we'll be right here, making sure no one forgets where it started. Not with 10,000 men, not with politics, with 300, and a king who made death look like destiny